Hey guys. Discussion for today. I thought I would be talking about how much is a human life worth. The couple of prompts that led me to that internal reflection. Well, first of all, most recently the conflict in Gaza, where we keep hearing about ratios and rules of war. Like, well, it's fine to kill one terrorist, or it's the rule of war that if you kill one terrorist for one civilian, or one civilian for one terrorist, well, that's kind of an acceptable ratio. So there's a complete disconnect to what the worth of a human life would be. But again, that's a topic of discussion. And a bit further away, also the entire situation with COVID, when we kept hearing the benefits outweigh the risks, in terms of vaccination. I don't want to go into that entire thing of the vaccination, although I'm an immunologist, but I'm a bit too skeptical about it, and so I don't want to get banned on YouTube, or it's a discussion for another day. But that entire concept of the benefits outweigh the risk, for whom? That it's all very relative. And so when you actually Google, or take any search engine that you want and look at what is a human life worth, there's actually a number associated to it. I was actually quite surprised. Um, so so I think it ranges, and that's obviously historically, like it kind of changed across the years, decades, or centuries, but the price ranges from whatever 10,000 to 10 million, and interestingly, a child is less worth than an adult. It's probably from a purely economic point of view, right? So an adult would be worth more just because they can work and they can provide something economically well, whereas a child is kind of worth less, which is an interesting concept. Um, so so based on the two prompts that I had, that there's kind of two things. So you might go with the dollar value, probably, let's say 10 million, and then there's the value as compared to something else. Are you happy to kill a civilian if it allows you to kill a terrorist? That's it's not a monetary value, but it's like, okay, I really want that, and so it's worth doing this for that. So it's another type of worth. It's like, it's not a monetary, it's a relative worth compared to something that you want to achieve. And so I feel, and I think it's almost like an endless discussion, because and it's also has a deeply spiritual aspect. What is a life worth? But I'm just thinking, if governments, if that's how they think, like that actually you can put a number on it, and it can have an equivalent worth to something else. Well, I almost feel that this should be something that during elections, it's fine. Okay, tell me about the economical the economy goals that you have. Tell me about your foreign affairs kind of strategy. Tell me about that. But then maybe we should throw into the mix. Well, how much do you think a human life is worth, and what are you willing to do? Uh, what are you willing to sacrifice? Because I think that goes into like that goes into interesting areas, where it reveals a bit more about yourself, your character, your morality, um, and so so let's say, for instance, so let's go back to the two examples. Like, for instance, during COVID, like, I was based in New Zealand. We had a complete lockdown of the islands, um, and I'm not going to go into the politics of the decision. It was as it was, but Based on the New Zealand system, we only had access to initially one vaccine. We didn't have quite the choice, so we took it. And again, not gonna go into the vaccine thing, but when the first person died of the vaccination based on side effects, I was kind of shocked by the. So it was I think it was in the Dominion Post, I think, an article, or was it on a news website? It might have been on stuff.co.nz. Anyway, so they were basically mentioning that as a news item. Fair enough. But what shocked me is the frequency at which, to me, I perceived it as being in every single paragraph of that article, there was the benefits outweigh the risk. So this happened, but the benefits outweigh the risk. And so we talked to the family, but the benefits outweigh the risk. And so it's really sad, but the benefits outweigh the risk. And it was so overdone that like it lacked complete humanity, complete empathy. This was just like almost like, it felt to me like a propaganda piece. And we were talking about one specific life. Do the benefits outweigh the risk for the family? Definitely not. Now, it is a question whether the benefits outweigh the risk as a population. And I'm not even criticizing political decisions like that. It's like, what would you do as a politician? If you have to, I mean, that's a question in itself. Do we have to? But let's assume that is the initial position, that we have to sacrifice something for something else. What's the trade-off? What are you willing to do? Like, what is your ratio? What is a human life worth? Is it worth sacrificing one person for 10 to keep 10 alive? Is it 1 to 100? Is it 1 to 1,000? 1 in a million? What does it mean the benefits outweigh the risks? You know, definitely not for the ones that are being touched by the risks directly. It definitely didn't work out for that person who died. So it's a relative thing. So I thought about it a lot, you know, and I must admit that, you know, I don't have the solution. If I would be in charge, I'm not sure what I would do. But it definitely prompted that deep reflection, and again, more recently with the Gaza-Palestine conflict, where they talk about rules of war and ratios, and this is where governments, and potentially out of necessity, need to detach themselves from the actual killing, because I mean, you kill a person, you go to jail for life, right? So that's a given, or you go to jail for a long time if it's a planned homicide. But then suddenly governments, they say like, well, we have these ratios and we have benefit, like we have a risk to reward ratio, like is this detachment necessary? Can we have a more empathetic form of government? Of course, there will always be hard decisions. So I'm not saying this is right or wrong. I'm just, inside of me, I'm almost, based on my perception of reality, you know, let's assume I would be in a position of power like that. How would I actually deal with that? And I'm not sure how I would deal with that. What is a fair stance for that? Now, for things like, well, for war conflicts like Gaza and Israel, that's where, I mean, that's where the entire thing of ratio wouldn't, that's a very foreign concept to me, and I would be against war anyway. for me, that entire Palestine-Israel conflict, it's obviously rooted in a large amount of history, and I have my entire other concepts of where, if you go long enough into the past, where that conflict in the Middle East actually was initiated. But let that be as it is. As Eckhart Tolle says, there's a significant amount of the collective pain body. The collective pain body of Israel and the collective pain body of Palestine is enormous. There was so much pain that these two, like, cultures or countries, or that they have accumulated, and no one's willing to let that go. They are fully identified with that pain body, and it's an eye for an eye, and no one's doing what is required to get peace, which is to break the cycle, to be a cycle breaker, and talked about that in another post. The ability to feel all of that pain, but not let other taste it. Do not just end the cycle right there. It's a very hard thing to do, but that's actually the only solution. To just stop. Your action is not predicated based on all the past, but it's like, right now, what can I do as a human being? What is the best course of action as a human being? And the past you have to let go of the past for that. You have to be a cycle breaker, and that's why we have so much conflict. Is because it's probably one of the hardest things to do as a human. It's one of the hardest energetic lessons as a soul, to be faced and have experienced so much pain, and being strong enough to transmute it, to alchemize it, and just to stop it right there. To stop the pain, to stop your ancestors were in pain, you are in pain. Can you just stop it for your children? And for all of the children involved on both sides, can you do that? That's a very, very difficult thing to do, and I appreciate that. But these ratios and these things, how can you stand there as a human being and talk about ratios? And it's a very foreign concept to me. Although I understand where it comes from, and it almost sounds logical, right? But how can you possibly assess the worth of a human life? You don't even know the person. Would a different person have a different worth than another? For me, soul experiences have a similar worth. I mean, some soul experiences or expressions, some lifetimes seem so much more pompous and so much more out there compared to maybe a calmer experience for another soul. And you would say, oh well, this person achieved X, Y, and Z, so this is worth so much more than the other one. From a soul's perspective, it's all the same value. It's soul progression. Every single life will lead to an evolution of the soul. So for me, that is an equivalent. And yeah, so the other example in terms of COVID, it's the same thing, you know. How can you, who actually, I don't even know who started with saying like the benefits outweigh the ratio. Who is able to say that? Who has the authority, the moral and the spiritual authority to say that the benefits outweigh the risks? Regardless of whether you can avoid side effects or not, whether a product is good or bad, whether it has been tested enough or not, how can you possibly make that call? And so for me, how I would resolve that is, to me, it's not acceptable. It's not acceptable to force anything on anybody, especially if there's risk involved. well, in medical research or biomedical research, I mean, I've conducted my own studies, and I've been active in that realm for quite a few years. If you recruit someone to a study, there's informed consent. You basically have to be fully transparent, explain all of the risks to the participants. Sometimes you pay them, because they have to travel to your study sites, and you might take blood samples and you do X, Y, and Z. So it's very easy if you're actually talking about healthy individuals where you just want to check something or you want to analyze some blood samples or something like that. It's more complicated, of course, once you have patients, cancer patients or any type of patients, then it's a bit more difficult to recruit. But you basically explain all the risks, and then the person can make an informed decision, fully informed. So they know exactly what could happen, they know the risk, and then they decide, well, is it worth it for me or not? But every single person has to do that choice for themselves. As a government, you should never be able to impose anything on anybody as soon as there are risks. And I think that's where the disconnect is. I think, and again, I'm not saying who's right or who's wrong. I'm basically saying what I would do in that situation. But I can also understand the other side to say, look, we have been elected to be in charge of this population of these 10, 100 millions of people, and we have a mandate to do that. And then it comes down to a decision to say, well, you gave me the mandate, so I'm going to make the hard choice to say the best of my ability, the only way I see, or the best way I see to protect you guys is to do this. And so I will have protected most of you, but I won't have protected all of you. And that's a decision, So basically, you almost make a decision based on doing nothing or based on doing something. Both aspects will have casualties, and you make the political decision to say, well, this is how it's going to go, and these will be the casualties. In another case, you would have done nothing. There would have been other casualties. So more or less, I don't know, but you basically make a choice. It's a hard one. I've been pondering about this question about the worth of a life and how it's if you take that responsibility seriously, to be in government, to be a politician, and to be in charge and to make decisions that impacts people's lives, like to the extreme that some people will actually die, that is a very serious responsibility. And I think, how deep would I have to know a person to give that person that kind of power? It doesn't even come close to what we know about our politicians. Like I would put people in charge, like if I would know them, like almost to the depth of their soul, where I would know, even if there's casualties, I can trust that soul, that reincarnated soul, to decide with the best outcome in mind. Whatever happens, happens. But I'm not sure I can say that about any politician, to be honest. There's a serious issue, and the problem is that we vote them in based on other factors, not necessarily on their morality or other things. We don't scratch the surface enough, and it's more like a show than a deep insight into who they are as people. And of course, this is only one aspect. I'm talking about two specific examples. This is only one aspect of political life. I fully understand that, and they're also responsible for other things like economy and things like that. Blah blah blah. But to me, as a spiritual person, these things weigh on my mind. These things, I want to understand them more. I want to understand how I would react. I always put myself in. I like sometimes to do that kind of play role where I put myself in other people's shoes and see, just to have that reflection of how would I have done things? Would I have done things differently? How would I react? Because these are complex topics. And as I keep saying, I don't know who's right and who's wrong. It's just, it's individuals' opinions. And it's just, where do these opinion or decision making processes come from? Does it come from a deeper spiritual side, or is it more like a practical aspect, which sometimes can actually be the best way to just go practical instead of having those deep feelings about these things. I don't know. And maybe society will change, and maybe we'll evolve, and maybe we'll have entirely different types of governments in the far future, or maybe not so far future. I don't know. Depends on all of us, what we want, how we want to be led. Do we want leaders that we follow by ourselves, or do we? I usually feel that there's people, and then they want to be followed, and then they're just gonna enforce their rules instead of being unilaterally accepted as a good human being, because that would also remove some of the contrast between supporters of different political parties. Like, how can you treat people or give them names? How come you have such a low opinion of a person? Like, do you actually know them? Is it based on their actions? Like, surely most people would accept a person that's a decent human being. Like, I don't know. I don't know where this reflection goes, but it's into how do we want to be led in society? Who's a true leader? Who's the true mentor? Who's the person we would follow? Like in those good old movies, like, I would follow you into death. Like, we don't have that anymore, right? Or did that ever exist, or was it just like tales in history of people so charismatic that we would follow them anywhere? I wish that would come back, but I think part of that is related to those to those discussions about the worth of people, the worth of man, and how do you value life? And that comes back to your deepest beliefs. Your value of life will come back to what are your beliefs about the soul, about God, about maybe you don't believe in God. What does that change your worth of a human life? And then I also need to counter check myself, because, well, I believe in reincarnation and all these things, and every life is finite, so that almost kind of removes value from, it's not a big deal. Well, I'm just gonna come back, it's fine. Oh, well, that one didn't go so well, but yeah, okay, let's go back. So that almost removes a bit of value, right? It's not as tragic as it seems based on that, but it's probably not it's not about that, but how did you come to lose your life? What happened before? And another aspect of that cycle breaking thing is this concept of karma. Now, I'm not too much into Hinduism, Buddhism, where that word karma comes alive, or was created, but it's that concept of, you have experiences, and then you also want to experience the other side of that. If you're a criminal, you will want, as a soul, to experience the other side of that crime. You will always want to experience both sides. Otherwise, as a soul, you don't have a complete picture of it. You cannot grow as a soul. So karma, in that sense, is nothing like, oh yeah, you've done something bad, so now you're going to be punished. No, no one's getting punished. It's like, you as a soul, you have this bigger viewpoint, this higher viewpoint, where, like, okay, I have one side of the story, now I want the other side of the story. It completely makes sense. No one gets punished ever. So karma is not that bad thing. But it's but if you are it's almost like in some conflicts, like you almost live both sides of the experience, right? Where you have so much pain, but then you become the perpetrator of, you transmit that pain. Um, but that, like, as a humanity will only heal if we just are able to be with that pain and not act on it. Not like, oh, I had it bad, so other people have to have it bad. Because I can't be the only one who has it bad here. Like, people have to pay for that, you know. That's why you have these continuous karmic cycles. It never stops unless someone or some people are able to hold that and to transmute it. It's just energy at the end of the day. But yeah, I mean, these were kind of my musings, my reflection on the value of life, my strong surprise when I actually saw that there might be a dollar value put on your life by your government. You should check how much is your life worth, you know, economically. And so they're also like, if you go into those on those kind of websites and things, there's some interesting stories about, well, this has actually a very practical implication. It's just normal day life when they say, well, accidents can happen, you know, and for instance, this is a risk in because of X, Y, and Z in a city. Well, you have this, this, and this, so this accident happens this amount of times, and so you have and then so many people die of that accident for instance, in the U.S. Per year, and how much would it cost to implement safety measures to prevent these? And so they're like, okay, this is how much it would cost to implement the changes, and this is how many lives we lose. So X times 10 million, whatever. And then if it costs more to implement, guess what's going to happen? It's a very practical way to apply that dollar value. So yeah, how would you, if you would be in charge, how would you react? How would you act? What would you do? It's probably not such a simple question, because I still don't know how I would do in different situations. But yeah, my musings for the day. Have a good day. Much love, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.